Let me confess that this is the first interview which I'm doing in my life. So don't expect a good journalist, and feel free to digress whenever you feel that it is appropriate. I will start with a philosophical question. I very much liked your paper on pragmatic Platonism, which per se sounds like an oxymoron. After reading it and reading that you are, you don't think to a double plane of reality, I wonder whether this is can be called Platonism at all. What are your views about mathematical knowledge?
Well, I don't really care whether it's called Platonism or not. My views are basically that that mathematics is deeply about infinitary things, that we are that we in fact are finitary beings with finitary limitations. I don't think our as Roger Penrose seems to think, that our brains have a secret quantum mechanical link that will enable it to do remarkable things. We're very finite, and yet we think about infinitary things. And the reason we keep doing it is because it is pragmatically successful. And the question, do these infinitary things really exist in some sense in this third plane of reality, Gödel expressed? I'm not even sure I know what it means to exist in that sense. They certainly don't exist in the observable universe that we are able to obtain information about, or there's no reason to think they do. I don't think anybody expects to discover tomorrow that there really is a real number continuum satisfying Dedekind completeness to be found somewhere in the universe. But the reason mathematicians keep working with these things is that they're very successful. They get amazing results. So just think about number theory, the things we know about the natural numbers, and we believe that these results, when we say that every positive integer is the sum of 4 squares, we think it makes sense even when we're talking about integers that are so large that there's no reasonable representation in which they can be written using all the material available in the observable universe. They have no concrete existence whatever. And still, if you ask a mathematician for such a very, very big integer, is it still the sum of 4 squares? He'll say, sure. And he'll trot out a proof and show you why. I don't know whether that answers your question, but...
Yes, it does, but I wonder why you have the reputation of being a Platonist, since you are so empirical, so your views are so empirical after all.
Whether I had the reputation of being...
Yeah, this is something I heard since 1975, and you also admit that, Harvey Friedman considers you a Platonist.
Oh, yes, that is true. An extreme Platonist, he said. Well, of course, I'm not responsible for Harvey Friedman's opinion.
So let's
let me contrast it. I have a very good friend who, alas, died just about a year ago, Harold Edwards, who was a colleague at the Quran Institute, taught in the undergraduate programs there. I don't know whether either of you ever ran into him.
No.
He was he's an extreme constructivist. As far as he's concerned, to talk about the continuum is just to talk about utter nonsense. And he loves 19th century mathematics and basically spent a lot of his career writing about it. He has a book on Fermat's last theorem, alas, written before it was proved. He has a book on the Riemann zeta function, and has done fascinating work about Galois, and Kronecker is his big hero, and so on. So I'm certainly, as far as he's concerned, I'm a wild-eyed Platonist in his eyes, simply because I'm willing to work with these things. With these things, and I think the work he does is interesting and very useful. That 19th century perspective is one that we tend to lose, we meaning the mathematical world at large, because of our success in dealing with these infinitary structures that enables us to see some of these phenomena that in the 19th century they only got to by doing tremendous amounts of calculation. And, you know, Hilbert made fun of all they do is calculate. Harold Edwards says, what is Hilbert making fun for? That's wonderful that they're doing all that calculation and getting the result. So I don't know if that helps.
Yeah. No, let me ask a question on the mathematical foundations. Well, mathematical logic and computability theory were really hot topics in the last century. Do you believe that they retain such an importance in the future? And can you see subfields of science in need of philosophical analysis comparable to the one that the foundational crisis stimulated 100 years ago?
I'm not sure how to answer that question. There are some ways in which computability theory is a very mature subject with very oh, here, Virginia, why don't you wave at our friends?
Oh, hola.
Hey, Virginia.
We can see you.
We can see you.
Wonderful to see you guys.
Okay.
Okay. Look. Is
Okay.
this Zoom? Are we all zooming together?
Yeah, this is certainly Zoom.
Zoom. Okay. Hey, be well and have fun.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I see you doubly, by the way. The computer I'm using is a Chromebook.
Yeah.
Which has Linux running in addition to the Chrome operating system. And so when I do tech, I'm using Linux, but it's a little laptop. over in this direction, I have a great big screen where with actually much better fidelity than the native one on this. So I see everything double, one right in front of me and one off to the side.
Okay.
As I say, it's a mature field, computability, with you know what was when I was young, what was this tremendous revelation, what's it called? You have to deal with my senility. I can't think of words. Post problem was solved. Priority method.
Priority method. Okay.
Priority method. That has developed into a virtuoso tool, which the practitioners, people like Robert Soar and colleagues here in Berkeley have developed into a fine-edged tool and have got amazing results. Jerry Sachs did incredible things many years ago, and so on. It's hard to see that aspect of the thing is going to develop much further. There is still hard open problems where it's not even clear where they're open because there's a question, this automorphism problem, I don't remember what it is anymore, that someone has claimed to have solved it by this intricate construction, and nobody else can make that construction work.
Right, right.
One of those situations where people see a gap, he fills in the gap, and then there's another gap, and
right.
So you know, that's I don't see anything amazing happenings with that, but it is conceptually, it's a very important in one direction. It's one important brick in foundational studies, and the other hand, it provides this amazing link with the world of practical computation, which has changed our lives in so many ways.
Right, yeah.
But when you began studying your academic career, you had to defend computability as so the dignity of computability as a novel discipline. And somewhere you mentioned the fact that even a person such as important as Alfred Tarski did not share your view at the time.
Yeah, well, of course we were both right. You know, I mean, I mean, I did something radical when I was little more than a boy at that time. I wrote that Computability and Unsolvability, which was a radical book because it presented computability as a subject in its own right, and logic was there as an application of computability theory. On the other hand, Tarski was right too, that a computability theory is one chapter in definability. What happens when you add a computational element to a definability, and that's a direction from which it also can be studied. So, you know, as often happens in these philosophical debates, both sides are really right.
Yeah, yeah. Let me ask you, remaining on...
Tarski is well known for defending his positions with a venom that is not always appropriate. I mean, here I was 22 years old, standing with some temerity and awe in front of, Alfred Tarski in this campus right here. At that time, we were living in Davis, California, just 80 miles away from where I'm sitting right now, and came in to give this talk. In fact, came in and it was sort of an amazing time in my life. Our younger son had just been born in Davis at home with nobody there except Virginia and me and his older brother. And this was maybe a week after that. I was standing there. In room 660 of Evans Hall, and gave this talk about, I think it was about hyperarithmetic sets, in which I had made that comment about that it could be viewed as an independent discipline, and the great Tarski stands up to give me a thorough bawling out.
It must have been quite an experience, right? Let me ask you, remaining on problems, on the big problems of the last century. In your foreword to Yuri Matasiewicz's book, the classic on Hilbert's 10 problem, you mentioned that you had a lifelong obsession with the Hilbert 10 problem. Are you still haunted by issues, by open problems around Hilbert's 10 problem today?
No, it's very, very different. I was writing about a situation when, first of all, I made this what Yuri Matusevich calls my daring hypothesis, that the recursively enumerable sets and the Diophantine sets were the same, that every, and a conjecture that was regarded as wildly improbable by most people who thought about it.
Right.
And I watched gap narrowing, and some of which being work I participated in actively. I'm not a number theorist. I've never been a number theorist. When I took an undergraduate class in number theory at City College, I didn't even get an A grade. I got a B. Hillary Putnam was certainly no number theorist.
Do you remember the name of the teacher? That would be nice.
Julia, it was. I mean, she was a real number theorist, unlike us. Hillary used to talk about amateur number theory, which was about right. But it always seemed, hardly a year went by when I didn't work on it to some extent and try out some other idea. And, with the hope of finally closing the gap. When Yuri closed it, that was wonderful, but that was that. It wasn't going to be closed again. I still have, at various times, I've thought of whether there is some overriding thing that can be done to make that 9 unknown results to improve it in some drastic way. But of course, that's very, very hard, and I've never got anywhere with that.
Still,
But this business about the open problem of the rational numbers, or the algebraic number fields, I can only look on from the outside of those things.
Yuri Matiasiewicz, in connection with the Hilbert-Stenz problem adapted to the rationals, regards you as a guru in the paper he wrote for your book, for the book dedicated to you, devoted to you, because you wrote something about the possibility of getting an answer through an approach inspired by some research by Poonen.
Oh, yes, well, who knows? It's an idea I keep I keep pushing in many different directions, that based on the existence of a simple set. That so you make a conjecture, but that I did that. I trotted out that trick for the first time it's in a joint paper with Hillary Putnam about Hilbert's 10th problem for polynomial rings. When at a time when Hilbert's 10th problem itself was still open, suggesting a path. I remember Abraham Robinson was so impressed by that trick that he said, yes, maybe your thing will really work.
Let me ask.
Same old trick I keep trotting at.
Let me ask you a question about these open problems.
I found, Poonen had this, he called it he didn't have a definition, a usable definition of the integers. First of all, he had this big subring of the rationals, and he was able to prove that undecidable by not by giving a definition of the integers in it, but given what he called a model. And so I used that model. I didn't use his theorem, but his construction, a way of being able to talk about the integers in a what do they call them? Elliptic curve.
Uh-huh. Let me ask you on open problems. Suppose you were to point to a theoretical problem, a young logician, a young mathematician, a computer scientist today. Would there be any interesting problem, anything comparable to Hilbert's 10th problem you would like to point him or her to work on?
Sure. Prove that the Riemann hypothesis is not provable in Peano arithmetic.
Mm-hmm.
Great. We'll pass the word.
I said so out loud in a talk I gave to MSRI here in Berkeley about a year ago.
Yeah, that's still an unprobability kind of question, proving that something cannot be done. I find that aspect interesting.
Yeah, I've always found that.
Okay.
Am I right in saying that you always prefer studying the limits of reasoning rather than the solvable cases of the Entscheidungsproblem? Is that true?
Well, who knows why?
So now, so actually, at present, you are much more interested in history of science than in novel mathematical problems. Am I right?
Well, I wouldn't put it that way. It's where I feel I could make a contribution rather than I certainly was very interested that Fermat's last theorem was proved, but I'm sure I will never understand the proof.
What do you think of the growing expectation on quantum computing? Do you think that there is a relationship with the parallelism, with complexity, that it's going to grow into something really moving forward?
I'm not understanding the question, Alberto.
Yeah, sure. Let me put it more simply. What do you think of the growing expectation about quantum computing?
Of the expectation of
Quantum computing. Quantum.
Quantum.
Yes.
I'm skeptical. I'm skeptical that, I mean, there's enormous resources, I mean, monetary resources put into this effort. Meanwhile, there are maybe 2 or 3 algorithms that anybody's been able to come up with that might make use of it. And the question of adapting the technology in such a way that when a result is obtained, you can receive it without this quantum connection being disturbed by any kind of contact with the quantum stream, with the rest of its environment. They call it, what is it, the D something or other. There's a word they use. One of the things I do these days is write reviews for mathematical reviews, the American Mathematical Society's reviewing thing. And one of they gave me a paper on theoretical quantum computing to review, in which the author, what's his name? Scott is his first name.
Aronson? Scott Aronson?
Scott
Aronson? Aronson? Aronson?
Maybe, I think so. I'm not sure.
He's a guy that is writing a lot on P equal to NP problems, Scott Aronson. I believe it's him, yes.
Yeah, probably, yeah.
Yeah.
Anyhow, he wrote in the paper that it's been disappointing that theoreticians have found so few. There's Shor's factoring algorithm, and I think one other that might have applications, but really very little. Uh, you know, when you compare what someone like Donald Knuth can do with ordinary computation, I mean, it's a little pathetic, and they're building these things that are expensive. Anyhow, he says what theoreticians do is because there's such a lack of any real results, they are considering what happens if you give the theoretical quantum computer additional powers. So there are two things. One of them was that it could take advice about what it's trying to compute from the outside world. And the other is that the wave packet wouldn't really collapse, that they would get the result, but the wave packet would still maintain its quantum integrity. So he said, what happens if we give it both of these capabilities? The wave packet won't collapse, and it can take advice about its computation. Well, he got an amazing result. All languages, however complicated they are, can be accepted by some such augmented advice.
I see. Quite a result.
I don't know what that is. That here or there? Do you hear it now?
You're on your side.
It's on your side.
Oh, I see. It's this phone over here. Excuse me. Okay. If you look at what he did, it's the most blatant triviality. I mean, if you give it advice, you simply construct the questions from the desired answer. Oh, excuse me. Yes?
Desired answer.
No, you got the wrong number. Goodbye. That's a second phone line that we never use. That's why I didn't know what the ringing was.
Yeah.
I mean, Scott Aronson. Yeah, that's exactly right. Yes. I would have been embarrassed to publish that result. It was such a triviality. Of course, if you tell it in advance, it can produce the answers. And of course, if you can do it over and over again, if the wave doesn't collapse, that's the whole paper.
So let me ask something different about the society, contemporary society. In 2018, Henry Kissinger described the role of artificial intelligence in contemporary society as a nightmarish, overwhelming power. More or less at the same time, a few months earlier, you wrote a paper on Turing's vision and deep learning. So in contrast with him, you are not at all alarming. So how do you see artificial intelligence today? Is it going to give us a hand, or is it a nightmare?
Both.
Both.
I mean, look, I'm sure you're aware of this recent episode when some member of the U.S. Armed Forces sitting at a computer terminal, probably somewhere in Colorado, decided that a certain automobile needed to be destroyed and killed a family and some children. All right, this is not artificial intelligence, it's distance. But that drone that did this, how long will it be before that drone has an AI in it that makes these decisions autonomously about who should live and who should die? That's terrible. And it's very likely to happen. On the other hand, there also are wonderful things that could happen. And in particular, I think it's very likely that that computer intelligence is going to be able to do anything that human intelligence can do, and in say 50 years from now or whatever, and it raises all sorts of questions about what's left for people to do. Certainly. There's no reason that everybody has to work, and that's not necessarily a terrible thing. People can do what they feel like doing, but if what they feel like doing is poisoning their bodies with drugs, that would be pretty unfortunate.
We are probably on the verge of some sort of Manhattan problem rewrote for the 21st century.
It may well be.
It may well be. Okay.
Well, what do you think of the so-called objective techniques for assessing the relative merits of researchers, H-index and the like?
Especially in view of the review that you just mentioned before. It looks like everybody is so much pushed in publishing that something that probably should better not be published is instead already.
I think it's all terrible. I'm glad I'm not dealing with the environment that a young researcher faces today. I was very lucky. I pretty much was able to do what I wanted to do and not worry much.
Yeah.
So let me ask you, how substantial has been political reflection and political engagement in your life?
To say it again, Eugenia.
So, in an essay dedicated to your friend Jack Schwartz, you describe you and him and others involved in studying Karl Marx's class Capital, and then you also describe in a self-biography you wrote that when you were in London in 1968-69, you were somehow taken by you were somehow under the influence of swinging London. Speaking in general, how substantial have been political reflection and political engagement in your life?
Well, these are two very separate and different things.
No.
We lived in London in the academic years 68, 69. This was swinging London, and it was all sorts of all sorts of interesting things going on that had nothing to do with the sorts of things we've been talking about here. The
So it's
there,
not.
for example, there was a building there was a building in London I think in District NW3 it was on the northern line of their underground railroad system, called the Roundhouse. It was a roundhouse was something that was used in railroads as a way of turning trains around. There would be a rotating platform with tracks, and so the train could go on it in one direction and then rotate and go off in another direction. It was no longer used for that purpose, so it became an experimental theater. And we saw a number of things there. We were sitting there we were sitting there, Virginia and me and our two sons. They were teenagers, and the Living Theater, these were a group of anarchists who were standing around, joining with the audience, taking off most of their clothing or all of their clothing and saying various things. I remember their first line was, "I can't travel without a passport. I can't travel without a passport." So Virginia thought that these people were kind of self-absorbed and so on. So she yelled out in a loud voice. She said, "I bet you wouldn't say, 'fuck the Queen.'" So one of the actors picked it up. He said, "This woman says that I wouldn't say 'fuck the Queen.'" I guess he was confused about use and mention. He kept saying that over and over again. Finally, our older son, Harold, yelled out, "That's no woman, that's my mother." So that's one anecdote.
Okay.
So
Probably you can't print it.
We will see. It would be interesting. Anyway, my congratulations to Virginia for the line. Okay, Martin, thank you very much. It was nice. I think they will do some editing. They will probably choose what to. I wonder what they will do with this last part.
Maybe we will have to have a second interview to fix the mistakes made in the first.
Anyway.
Oh, I'd like to tell you one other thing.
Sure.
The Living Theater, they were really Americans. They weren't English. There was in New York a few years later, the the Russians had just detonated an enormous hydrogen bomb, the biggest one that had ever existed. And Virginia and I were part of a protest against the Russians for doing that. And the people from the Living Theater, the same people, were there in New York, in the streets of New York, and there were New York police on horseback, and one of the I forget his name, one of the founders of this Living Theater was actually had been knocked over and was lying on the road. So we had another intersection with the Living Theater years later.